Nearly all the combat power is now in range of Iran, and a strike could come at any time, literally any time, even later on this afternoon, potentially. And as we try and figure out, is that going to happen? Should it happen? Is it legal to happen? Many of those things we need to take a look at here. We don't want to just look at the military analysis without putting things into context. And we have somebody, a new guest on today. I'm really excited to have Jeremy Scahill, journalist at dropsitenews.com. And I'm personally just really excited to have him on. You first came to my attention in 2013 when just after I got back from Afghanistan, and you produced this documentary. It was called Dirty Wars, which I thought was one of the most amazing pieces of art and truth that I'd ever seen on the Afghan war. So really great to have you on today.
It's my honor to be with you, and thanks for all the work you've done over the years since you left the service too.
Well, certainly that's my pleasure. But and I'm really glad. By the way, that people can see if you want to see good cinema and historically, still go back and watch Dirty War. Still great even after all this time. Just fascinating work that was done. Just shows the depth of Jeremy's skills as a journalist. And we're going to take advantage of that today, as a matter of fact. So I want to start off here talking about, whether we are or whether we aren't ready to strike. The military is basically in place. Anything could come starting today and going forward here. But the question is, will Trump pull the trigger? And at his so-called Board of Peace meeting, which is kind of a weird name based on all the things they talked about, but he said this in terms of Iran and what his decision-making process might be.
They must make a deal, or if that doesn't happen, I maybe can understand. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But bad things will happen if it doesn't. With the commitments announced today, the Board of Peace is proving that it was.
Yeah, and then so he continued on from there. But the bad things are going to happen, he says, if they don't. Now, I just kind of wonder how you place these comments in context of what may come next, given some of the similar comments that were made, first of all, before the Venezuela strike that happened when he was talking about Maduro, and back in the June 2025 before he actually struck Iran the first time. What do you make of his comments?
Well, Daniel, let's remember also that in June, when Israel and the United States waged the so-called 12-day war, where they did this fairly significant bombing campaign and they killed more than 1,000 Iranians, estimated conservatively 400 of them were civilians. They also assassinated Iranian nuclear scientists, killed leaders of the IRGC and other military leaders. Those bombings were conducted when Donald Trump was telling the Iranians that there was going to be another round of negotiations in the Sultanate of Oman. So he essentially used the veneer of moving forward with another phase of negotiations to, I guess, win the advantage of some form of a surprise attack. And some of the heaviest bombers that were deployed in those strikes, as you know better than I do as a military expert, actually flew from the continental United States, had to do some refueling, and then they dropped very large munitions. They didn't have anywhere near the scale of buildup as they did right now in the Gulf. But as the Iranians are reportedly drafting some sort of a response to what the Americans told them in the indirect talks that took place in Geneva at the residence of the Omani ambassador, the specter of the U.S. doing such an action again is very real. Trump is now known for openly lying. It used to be back in the 80s or before, in the sort of era of dirty wars, you would try to have some kind of believable cover story, and the president would try to maintain plausible deniability. Well, this is a president who himself will just lie to the world, in an effort to sort of give cover to a military operation. I'm emphasizing this because as we talk, and we'll talk about it right now, as we talk about where the negotiations stand, let's remember that at any moment, the U.S. could just decide to pull the trigger and conduct strikes. What I'm told by people who have access to some of the deliberations that have been going on, this is a very unusual, erratic presidency, is that since the protests began in early January in Iran, and when Trump then intervened and said, seize institutions, help is on the way, that he's been kind of openly opining that he wants to be known as the president that forever changed the Iranian regime. And so what the Americans have done here is put really maximalist demands on the table. And, Trump obviously wants them to capitulate. Now, the Iranians have drawn their own red lines. So the question now is what's going to happen when the Iranian response comes back and Trump doesn't like it? That's if it even gets to that phase. So as you indicated at the beginning, we're on standby. Certainly when I saw the USS Gerald Ford starting to make its way over there, for people that aren't so familiar with military deployments, the people on board that ship were due for a rotation. And so and it needed maintenance because it was a key part of the Venezuela operations. To take the trouble to move that thing all the way to the other side of the world, indicated to me this is very, very serious. And if Trump goes one of two options, is what it sounds like. He indicated it's on the table. Either they're looking at limited strikes while keeping the broader force in place, hoping that sort of quote unquote softens the Iranians, which I think is unlikely. And then they have this massive armada in place to do humongous military strikes. That's one possibility. The other is that they just go all in. When, we did a piece the other day where you were one of our main voices in it, Daniel, and you were talking about this. They could go in, try to blitzkrieg by hitting the offensive capability, command and control, taking out the air defenses, maybe even trying to do some initial leadership strikes at the beginning, take out naval assets. That will then indicate what kind of response the Iranians can offer, because the Iranians, and I've talked to sources in Iran about this, the Iranians are saying no more calibration, no more choreography. We may look to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. I had one Iranian source say that he was told by people in the inner circles that they would aim to kill 500 U.S. service members as considered a proportionate response to what they view as an existential threat to their government. So we're in a very, very dangerous situation right now. The president of the United States is gambling with a much wider war and the prospect of potentially large numbers of American military personnel or other Americans in the region being killed or harmed.
Yeah, we actually had Trita Parsi on our show a week or so ago, and he says his sources in Iran are saying that similar to what you said, that they don't want to have a proportional response here. They don't want to do the choreographed thing because they believe that is what is continually lead to the next one where they get attacked and they get attacked, and then they said it'll just never start. So they want to, quote, reestablish deterrence by causing lots of casualties. He didn't have a number on it, but that is a sobering number, because that would be terrifying if that came to pass, especially, and I'll just point this out, this would be a war of choice, and not one of those people need to die, but we'll talk about that in a second. But let's stick, first of all, on whether this is going to happen and what the Iranian side is saying at this point. There was this morning, well, first of all, at least what's being claimed is, and this is part of the problem on the U.S. side, what is this all about? Is it about those poor protesters? Because that's what it started off. That was the red line. Well, then it really wasn't that. Then it was, well, they can't hang them. Well, okay, they didn't do that. So now it moved on. Now it's back to the nuclear deal, even though we obliterated it last time. And then, well, no, actually it's the long range missiles, and maybe it's the proxies too. Who knows what it is? And so when you talk about all these different things, the Iranian side is trying to negotiate this, has to figure out what the standards are that's even being talked about. And Foreign Minister Arakchi on U.S. television this morning said this.
Your position is that the United States didn't ask for a permanent suspension of enrichment. Is that what you're telling me?
Yes. What we are now talking about is how to make sure that Iran's nuclear program, including enrichment, is peaceful and would remain peaceful forever. And in return, Iran does some confidence building measures to ensure that its program would remain peaceful.
So this sounds like what was in Geneva the other day was not even talking about zero enrichment, but just about making it a peaceful program, which is very different than what's being claimed outside. What do you make of that apparent contradiction?
Well, it's interesting. Just before we went on air here, Joe Scarborough, who was the host of that interview with the Iranian foreign minister, said he was contacted after the interview by a senior administration official who clarified that Trump's position is zero enrichment, but that they would be willing to compromise on the Iranians giving full access to independent inspectors to come in and verify it. Now, let's say we were dealing in a sane world. What we would be, which we aren't, but let's say that we were, because this is part of when I talked about cover stories at the beginning. I want people to remember this all could just be a cover. They're delaying a little bit. They want to get a few more assets in place. They depleted a lot of their munitions that are capable of defeating Iranian counterstrikes. So they needed to buy some time. You and I both heard, Daniel, that earlier in January, the president was ready to roll on this, ready to pull the trigger. The Israelis were concerned there weren't enough munitions to defend Israel. The U.S. military planners were also saying that if the Iranians do a larger scale attack, maybe some of our assets in the region will be vulnerable. So they used negotiations to delay a bit. But let's say we were talking about sane people here, particularly in the White House. What we'd be looking at is probably a breath of relief that what they're actually focused on is the Iranian nuclear issue, because overwhelmingly, it's not even a real issue. U.S. intelligence going back to late 2003 has indicated that the Iranians had largely abandoned their nuclear weapon ambition. Now, U.S. policy has made it so that at times the Iranian government says, well, maybe we should pursue a nuclear weapon. But I think anyone who actually has been paying attention to national intelligence estimates knows that this is a little bit of a fake issue in some way. And so, if it was really about nuclear, and you have the Iranian foreign minister indicating an openness to have inspectors come back in, independent verification, then we're talking about a reasonable negotiation like the 2015 Iran deal that Barack Obama did and that Trump then ripped up. But we always have to take into account the possibility that none of this is actually real. And that's why they're focusing on the nuclear thing, because it doesn't actually matter. Now, we had been told earlier that, and this is certainly what Israel wants, that the U.S. wanted ballistic missiles on the table, that they wanted a dramatic reduction in Iran's ballistic missile capability. Iran has hypersonic missiles. Iran has shown in its counterstrikes against Israel and against some U.S. bases that its missiles do have an ability to defeat the U.S.-provided countermeasures. And if they do it in a larger number, that could happen. It's Iran's only deterrence. And so part of what I think Trump's people and military planners are calculating is, if Trump can win without firing a shot, a massive degradation of Iran's only deterrence, their missile system and their Shahada drone system, then there's no need to do regime change operations, because they're going to be so vulnerable that Israel and the U.S. can dominate them, because they don't have a nuclear weapon, because they would have given up a bunch of ballistic missile capability. So the Iranians are not going to do that.
Let me ask your opinion, because to me, that if they succeed in that, again, if this was a sane world, and it's not, but even theoretically, if that was the actual objective, and for some reason Iran says, you know what, I'm willing to go ahead and give that up because otherwise we're going to take too much damage, I don't think that the U.S. and Israel would dominate them. I think they would say, all right, it's just like with Libya. As soon as you don't have the ability to strike back, we're going to come in and then we'll destroy you when you can't even hit us back.
No, this is what I mean.
Yeah.
You and I are agreeing. What I'm saying,
Okay.
when I talk about being able to dominate them, what I mean is
militarily.
Yeah, I mean, look at what happened when Assad was overthrown and the rebels marched on Damascus. What's the first thing that Israel did?
Yeah.
It went in and it bombed the entire conventional military capability of Syria, including all of its conventional defense systems that would only have value in repelling an attack by another nation state. It has no internal value whatsoever. So what I'm saying is, if the Iranians agreed, which I don't believe under any circumstances they would, to remove large portions of their ballistic missile capability, then they would cease to be an actual nation state anymore, because what would follow that is Israel would just start regularly bombing any conventional military assets they have left. It would leave their naval forces entirely exposed. It's why I don't think the Iranians are going to take this deal at all, or these capitulations.
And as we're acknowledging that the U.S. is not dealing in reality, I think that the Iranian regime is very much dealing with reality, and is, for all the things we ascribe to them as being irrational and basing policy based on religion and stuff, they have shown, in my view, since 1979, a very pragmatic and logical organization. Even if I don't agree with their ruling philosophies or so, their behavior is quite pragmatic. That is important now, because in that same interview with Scarborough, he was asked, can the U.S. with militarily get rid of their program?
There is no military solution for Iran's nuclear program. That has been tested last year, and there were a huge attack on our facilities, on our, they killed and assassinated our scientists. but they couldn't kill our nuclear program. Why? Because it is developed by ourselves, by our scientists. This is a technology developed by us, belongs to us.
So do you think that he's just being a lot of a hyperbole there, saying, no, you can't bomb it? Or do you think they really have taken measures so that we can't destroy it?
I think the point that the foreign minister was making, and the Iranians have made this before, is that you can't kill our intellectual and scientific capacity. It's not about the sites themselves. I think what they're talking about is is the idea. And I think that the U.S. all the way up to the highest levels of power, I think that they know very well that the Iranians have not been intent on building an actual nuclear bomb. And from the Iranian perspective, they're saying if you eliminate our ability to even produce civilian use nuclear, then you're trying to send us back generations in terms of our development and our ability to have a modern nation state. Now, the flip side of this is that at the core of the protests that began in Iran in late December and early January, and remember, they started off as large-scale peaceful protests that were organized. Initially, they were organized, and we did some reporting on this back in November. The oil worker sector was protesting in Iran. And these weren't people that were calling for regime change, but they were very angry about the economic conditions in the country. Then you had the bazaris, the merchants, as we would say in America, the small business owners. They start taking to the streets because prices were skyrocketing. Inflation was out of control. The market was horrible for them. And they're in the streets protesting. The supreme leader of Iran comes out and says they should be listened to. And then you had everything descend into violence. And you had Trump and the son of the deposed Shah calling on people to rise up and seize institutions. And you have this bloodbath unfold. And the Iranian government says this was outside agitators that created this situation. This was an attempt at regime change from within. There's a huge battle of narratives right now. But what is undeniable is that the United States, with open intent, has tried to strangle economically the civilian population of Iran to try to make the country unlivable and people so angry that the conditions arise where they want to see their own government toppled. This is a classic American tactic where you have the iron fist of militarism that backs up this sort of economic warfare. And so the Iranians, as they go into these negotiations, Daniel, what they're, in addition to saying we're not going to give up our military deterrence, otherwise we won't be a nation state anymore, they're looking for a relief from these punishing, sweeping economic sanctions. What I understand is that Trump's people are putting on the table only, we won't impose new sanctions. Iran is suffering tremendously right now, not just because of the oil sales, but basic goods are just out of reach of most Iranian families right now because of this economic warfare. Treasury Secretary Bessent has said multiple times that the protests that we saw in Iran were the intended outcome of the American policy. This is using economic policy to punish a civilian population. And so that, the stakes of this, again, if we were talking about a sane negotiation, the Iranians are asking for sanctions relief that would primarily have the impact of loosening the noose from the necks of a civilian population, not the quote unquote regime itself.
Right. And that's of course, something that we won't even contemplate because there's been so many folks we've shown here over the last month or so in the U.S., especially in the government, say, no, that's our objective is to prevent that. We don't want to give a quote lifeline to the government. And we'll harm the people all we need to make sure that we get what we want, or at least we think we'll get what we want. Iran is not a passive actor here. And because we are threatening with the regime change, we have now given them more motivation to use more force than they have in the past. And they are signaling some of this very much openly. For example, here the Iran, let's first of all just look at their air defense sites that Iran has put up, because this is not going to be an easy task here. We can say we're going to go in and knock out their air defense. This is an estimate of where these things are, but there's a lot of them, and a lot of these are mobile sites. Many of them that are out right now. There's others that are not out, and they could come out of other locations. They're intentionally being hidden because anything that's out right now is definitely going to be targeted with the satellite imagery we have, et cetera. This is going to be a hard task. That's number one. Then the second one is that Iran published this letter, actually, which very openly said, if you attack us, and let me just read that key part there. The Islamic Republic of Iran has repeatedly stated at the highest levels, this is just yesterday, by the way, that it neither seeks tensions nor war and will not initiate any war. However, in the event that it is subjected to military aggression, Iran will respond decisively and proportionally in the exercise of its inherent right of self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter. In such circumstances, this is key, all bases, facilities, and assets of the hostile forces of the region would constitute legitimate targets in the conduct of their response here. Do you think that this is just empty rhetoric, that maybe they don't have the capability, or do you think they really can and will attack American bases and Israeli targets?
I don't think that the Iranians have been bluffing when they've said that they have operated with restraint. They typically use a phrase saying they want to slap, the United States. You hear that phrase a lot. And I'm not hearing that as much from Iranian sources. I think that they're confident that they're going to be able to do much more significant damage and kill people. Remember, when Iran was attacked by the United States and Israel, it calibrated its counterstrikes in Israel almost entirely to be aimed at military targets. At the time, there was a lot of bad reporting that turned out to be false, that the Iranians were firing at civilian targets in Israel. Even the Israeli media and government now is acknowledging that the overwhelming majority of Iranian missiles were aimed at military sites inside of Israel. And part of what happens is that those kinds of sites are calibrated by the Israelis to be protected. This is common sense of any nation state. You protect your government buildings, you protect your military sites. If the Iranians now overwhelm Iron Dome, which they could, and especially if they start using hypersonic missiles in greater frequency, you could have high-rise buildings hit. You could have urban centers of Tel Aviv and other cities in Israel hit. You could have mass casualty incidents that take place. When it comes to U.S. military bases, you've had, even with the calibrated response, you've had a failure of some U.S. systems at times. So imagine, and that's even with a calibrated, choreographed response with pretty sophisticated American systems. Let's say the Iranians go all in this time. Let's say they overwhelm some of those systems. There's no room for mistakes on the part of the American personnel that are operating the countermeasures there. The slightest mistake could mean you have dozens, if not more, American soldiers dying. Then you talk about what happens in the waters. It's going to be very difficult to simultaneously take down all of Iran's naval assets. At the beginning of a campaign, Iran absolutely would have a capacity to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. And I think then you start looking at a much more global response, because it's going to have a dramatic impact on the economic situation. And one of the saddest aspects of this from an American perspective is that part of what I've heard from people who are dealing with the Trump administration is that they're talking politics in some of these intelligence briefings. Can we do this stuff by the midterm elections? They're not necessarily thinking of it from tactical or national security grounds. I think these guys got so high on their own supply off of that Venezuela operation that they start thinking, we can do this again. And it's not that I think they're going to go and try to kidnap the supreme leader of Iran. I think they may be convincing themselves, listen, if we whack the upper echelons of that society, we can go to the people next down from it and say, you want to make a deal? No? Okay, we kill you too. This sort of mafia type stuff. I think that's possible with it. The sanest way, and this goes back to your era also in the military. You remember a general by the name of Jay Garner, who was sent in and was going to be the guy in charge of post-war Iraq. I want to remind people of this story because it's very interesting. Jay Garner, when he was originally going to be the guy that was going to take charge of post-war Iraq after they deposed Saddam Hussein, and General Garner, who's a military guy, comes in and he is advising the political officials from the Bush-Cheney administration, do not try to do this de-Baathification, where you compare the Ba'ath Party in Iraq to the Nazi Party and you say everybody who was affiliated with it has to go. Instead, let's get rid of the generals from the inner circle. Let's go down to one rank down, and let's get down to the level of like colonel. Let's start talking to the people that run the military. Let's start talking to the number 2, number 3, number 4 in some of these government ministries. Let's keep the entire security apparatus in place in Iraq. We'll cut off the top of the regime, but we'll essentially co-opt the rest of it. And the Iraqis had been trained by the United States. Iraq was a major ally prior to the 1991 Gulf War of the United States in the war against Iran. So what Jay Garner was saying is, you're going to create a civil war. You're going to create anger in the society. You're going to lay off 250,000 soldiers. Don't do it. Well, Jay Garner's removed, and who comes into power? Paul Bremer, an ideological neoconservative who cut his teeth under Henry Kissinger, made a lot of money off of risk assessments and risk insurance. And he was a guy who came in, oh, we're going to redraw the maps of the Middle East. So they didn't listen to their own military people. They come in, they put ideology in there. In the case of Iran today, this isn't Iraq. Iran had an Islamic revolution in 1979. There are no armed rebel groups trying to overthrow the Iranian government. The diaspora Iranians, you either have people in the camp of Pahlavi, the Shah's son, who is a totally discredited figure, who has never set foot in Iran and has lived his entire life off of stolen money of the Iranian people. And then you have like cults like the MEK, who cozy up to power in Washington but have no actual base. It's not like Syria where you had multiple armed groups. So what's the day after look like in Iran? Okay, you overthrow the Iranian government. Then what? This isn't Libya. This isn't Syria. This is a catastrophe waiting to happen. And Iran is a nation of institutions. It's not just the supreme leader. They've been building this since 1979. So, if you were a sane military planner and you're looking at this, you say to Trump, this is a very bad idea. This is a very, very bad idea. Iran is a modern society of 90 million people with high scientific capacity, with a highly educated society. Negotiation is the most logical thing in the interest of the American people. War makes no sense. War makes absolutely no sense. This is a modern, civilized society that happens to have an ideology that the United States government doesn't like.
War makes no sense if, as you say, you're listening to somebody giving you cold, sober, actual military advice based on the actual realities. But instead, we are listening to a lot of guys like Ambassador Huckabee.
If there's not a deal, and a deal means they get rid of their nuclear enrichment, they don't have any more aspirations for nuclear weapon, they quit killing their citizens, and they start lowering the inventory of ballistic missiles, and especially the range. If they don't do that, President Trump has said there is no deal. If they don't believe President Trump will do what he says in a military action, then they're not real smart, and they certainly have a short memory. They don't remember what happened to them last summer. I hope Americans understand that this is not just about Israel or the Middle East. The threat of Iran has for 47 years been focused on death to America. They have moved their proxies all over the world, including 12 countries in the Western Hemisphere. They are a clear and present danger. They hired a would-be assassin to murder President Trump. They killed hundreds of Americans. And they also are the largest state sponsor of terror. They finance the Houthis, Hamas, and Hezbollah. If we don't step on that oxygen hose, we continue to deal with the proxies. Get rid of the Iranian regime, let those people live a free life again, and you really do realign the world.
You said a minute ago that this administration is not even trying to do what they did like in the Bush administration to put a fictitious cover on something. Well, Huckabee seems to be trying to go back to that because he is creating a lot of fiction. What do you think to his comments?
Yeah, I mean, look, Huckabee is still a Fox News pundit masquerading as an ambassador. I mean, he could just as easily be a less intelligent foreign minister of Israel than the current foreign minister, Gideon Sa'ar. I mean, there's almost nothing that Mike Huckabee ever says anymore that isn't just advocating Israel's position. He seems to think that being the U.S. ambassador to a country means that you immediately become a representative of that country. So, he often will stake out a position that is even more extreme than the one being advocated by Donald Trump, because Huckabee is basically a little poodle being walked around the block by Netanyahu day and night. So I wouldn't necessarily take Huckabee as the kind of voice of the administration. He certainly is representing the Netanyahu wing of the Trump administration, and it's not an insignificant voice. You clearly have Netanyahu wanting to make the issue ballistic missiles and the supposed support for proxies, as they call it in the region. But Daniel, I want to tell you something interesting that a couple months ago I mentioned this earlier. I met with a very prominent former Iranian official. And one of the things he also said is, on this issue of so-called proxies, we, the Iranians, have tried repeatedly to get them to do actions for us over the years. And time after time, they've failed to do it. And he was sort of saying, we've paid the price for it. And he was talking about Hezbollah. He was talking about
Yeah.
Ansar Allah, and what he was basically saying is sometimes we would sit and wish that we had the kind of control that these people seem to think that we
That's
that we
fascinating.
have. So, I think that we're in a situation where if we step back and look at it, Iran is in a lot of trouble. And if you look at it in a geopolitical sense, what has happened with Gaza is that the Israelis they're in control of almost 60% of Gaza right now. They got Hamas and Islamic Jihad to release every single captive, living and dead. They're now trying to push them into demilitarization. Hamas and Islamic Jihad, we can talk about this later if you want, are saying, no, we never agreed to that. They wiped out the upper echelons of Hezbollah in Lebanon. The U.S. now has a government in Lebanon that is much more pliable, seems willing to localize the fight against Hezbollah, something that many Lebanese were against. The idea that now the Lebanese forces are going to be the ones to be fighting the remnants of Hezbollah. You have Israeli annexation of the West Bank moving forward. Assad fell in Syria, which means that supply routes into Palestine via Syria into Jordan and then into the West Bank have been largely cut off. So the armed resistance in the West Bank has been rapidly and radically depleted. You then have Iran being subjected now to open American bombing campaigns on a regular basis. Netanyahu has achieved a tremendous strategic victory in this moment, in the sense that he's gotten America to sign off and to support, endorse, arm, and defend, and participate in at times, a sweeping set of attacks across the Middle East. And so Iran now is by itself. Russia's not going to come in to help. China's not going to come in to help. Iran is on its own. And it was the only official nation state that actually attacked Israel in response to the genocide in Gaza. So from the Iranian perspective, they see this as, we are in a fight for our very existence. We saw what happened in Lebanon. We see what Netanyahu is doing. We understand this enemy. And that's why I say, if the U.S. attacks, even if Trump says it's a limited attack, I think we're going to see a very strong Iranian response, because they're backed into a corner right now. And you hear that from all of the Iranian pundits. You've had some of them on, people, and I don't say pundit in a derogatory way. I mean, people that are not in the state, but are advocating for the Iranian position. They are talking in a very belligerent way about how Iran is going to respond. I don't look at that and say, oh, this is bluster. I look at that and say, this is how seriously they view the threat right now, that they are not going to show restraint.
And one of the additional reasons that maybe Huckabee has a limited exposure, but some of other President Trump's other biggest supporters in the United States are taking it even more belligerent. I'm going to show you something here from Senator Ted Cruz a couple of days ago, where he's talking, and again, I think that he may maybe a sort of the General Garner effect a little bit in reverse, where his eyes are real big about what he sees we did in Venezuela, what he thinks we can do in Cuba, what he thinks is going to happen here. And they think, man, we can just keep doing this everywhere.
We're at an extraordinary moment in history. It is entirely possible, Sean, that in the next 6 months, we will see the regimes fall in Iran, in Venezuela, and in Cuba. And we could also see governments replace them that want to be friends with the United States of America. Now, let me be clear. I'm not being Pollyannish about this. There are 1,000 things that can go wrong. But if that happens, this would be the most consequential geopolitical shift since the fall of the Berlin Wall, since America won the Cold War without firing a shot. I spoke with President Trump the day before yesterday, and we talked in particular about Iran. And I said, this moment, the regime is teetering. The Ayatollah is in his last days. And I said, do not let this opportunity pass.
Do not let, but he said, I'm not being Pollyannish. Well, no, you are being Pollyannish if you think it's going to be easy here. But the mentality, though, that, yeah, let's just start taking everything we want. There's no international law for this. This doesn't even comport to American law. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, you have Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham, these kind of chicken hawks that have never met a war that they didn't want other people's children to go and fight, and they're talking with all this bravado right now because This time around, the first administration, Trump he seemed to really be concerned about doing too much militarism. And, you read about the deliberations they had just to kill General Qasem Soleimani at the Baghdad airport, and the way that Trump would talk about John Bolton. Well, right now, Trump's doing what John Bolton wanted him to do in his first administration. And so you have this neoconservative strand that has really taken over large parts of Trump's foreign policy. It's a total walk away from, the kind of isolationist libertarian wing of the Trump administration that, really manifested itself in a much stronger way in that first administration. But I think that also Trump is enamored of all of the toys of U.S. militarism. And he's like, oh, I can get that. And then he has that clown, Pete Hegseth, as defense secretary, total loony bin drinking buddy. So all of a sudden is now the defense secretary. So it's the perfect cocktail of wackadoodles, neocons, and then you've got these like puppy dogs barking on the sideline, like Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz. And I think it's a really dangerous combination of people. And it's chicken hawkery also. It's like they think it's just real fun to use the US military to just bomb countries around the world. It's almost like a hobby. This is sickening. Yeah. And I saw in the preview, you were saying we were talking about the War Powers Act. Let me just say one thing about the Democrats. Where the hell are they? Total silence. And part of it is that, the Democrats also, I think a bunch of them want regime change in Iran, but they want the mess to be on Trump. So they're quiet. You have a few of them that are popping up, but not many, because they're perfectly fine for this to be. And they're like, oh, well, if Trump does this and it turns into a disaster, good for us in the midterms.
Well, and that's exactly where I wanted to go next. In fact, we have Senator Mark Warner. You're going to hear him talk about one thing like he's not that big of a problem. In my view, there's something more important that he doesn't say here that is just as alarming to me.
How actually concerned are you that there are currently plans for a military operation in Iran? And do you believe that those plans are just pie-in-the-sky plans, or are they actionable plans that the administration is ready to use?
I don't know. I'd like to say, well, I've been briefed, and I just can't say. I don't know. Now, a president always has the rights to take action, but normally normally when he doesn't brief Congress, or at least the Gang of Eight, that's because there is some emergency that precipitates a quick action, and then you notify or brief right afterwards. He is going to launch a war with just Israel at our side. Is not in the best interest of the United States at this point, without trying to build up alliances, without also, frankly, having consultation with Congress.
Okay, so I got a big problem with that. I got a big beef with that, because he says something here which is common characterization of the 1973 War Powers Act, which is that the president can almost do whatever he wants for 60 days, and then he has to come back. And that is not what the 1973 War Powers Act says. It is not what the Constitution says, which definitely is not superseded by that. And yet there he is. You never heard him say, well, how can the president order a war against Iran unless he first gets a declaration by the Congress? That never entered his mouth. He actually conceded that, yeah, Trump can do this. What does that say to you?
Yeah, and also, if you go back, remember when Joe Biden, the former president, was first in the Senate in the early 1970s, one of the big issues he took on was supporting the War Powers Act. And then you fast forward to the 1990s in the war against Yugoslavia, and Joe Biden was arguing before the U.S. started bombing Serbia in 1999, oh, what about the War Powers Act? And Republicans actually were the ones. This is a crazy story. Republicans, when Bill Clinton wanted to go to war against Yugoslavia in 1999 to depose Slobodan Milosevic, it was the Republicans who started raising war powers issues. And it was Joe Biden typically would have agreed with him, but then what happened is politics. All of a sudden, then the Democrats start being the ones to make the argument against the application of the War Powers Act in advance of a U.S. military operation. And so the Democrats created, with their own policies, they created a murky territory politically. When the War Powers Act is raised, it's almost like an afterthought, or it's just an ornament on the Christmas tree to sort of look at occasionally. I agree with what you just said, Daniel. Even when they do talk about the War Powers Act, they mischaracterize it. It's sort of like why the Congress never wants to legislate the issue of what is an assassination. You know, there's been executive orders going back to Gerald Ford prohibiting the United States government from engaging in assassination. But Congress has never wanted to legislate what defines an assassination, because they want to be able to do things like kill Osama bin Laden or do leadership strikes in other places. So what we're seeing here is we have a constitution that's written very clearly for a reason. We have laws that are written very clearly for a reason. And we have Democrats and Republicans that, when it's politically expedient, decide to promote, and they all get together and get on the same page about it, promote false, erroneous interpretations of very clear constitutional law. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing a combination of misconstruing what the law says, overstating the powers of the presidency of one of the three branches of government, or just outright lying about it. And then in the case of the Democrats, just being silent because they want Trump to go ahead with it. And either it succeeds and it's great politically for them, or he gets the U.S. embroiled in a nightmarish mess that maybe even kills American soldiers, and then it's better for them in the midterms. It's the most cynical, toxic representation of the politics in our country.
couldn't improve on that anymore. And one of the problems with this ignoring of the rule of law in the U.S. Constitution is because there could be other consequences. So you have Ted Cruz there talking about we can go after this country, that country, this other country. Oh, maybe we're going to take Greenland, etc. We communicate to everybody that nothing is off the table here, and other countries who have agency, and especially China and Russia, are certainly not going to sit by and be passive. Now, you said a second ago that you didn't think that Russia or China would do anything to help Iran, but they do seem to be helping them in some capacities. For example, China, I think it was yesterday, published this some satellite imagery of the U.S. planes. Gary, if you can pop that one up there on the X. So it looks like that they're doing something here about saying, hey, if you're looking for some targeting information, here's where some American planes are. I think this one in this screenshot here is in Jordan. Yeah, that's the one right here. This is published by the Chinese. There's also reports that they have given Iran some DF-17s. Don't know if that's true. They've given them some radars that can intercept our stealth fighters, etc. I don't know anything about Russia, but the fact that they're doing even this here concerns me, that they're doing other things behind the scenes that we don't see.
Oh, I don't disagree with you at all. And in fact, if we look at, and you've covered this extensively, Daniel, but if we look at the war in Ukraine and the relationship between Russia and Iran when it comes to drones and some other munitions, there's a very solid partnership there. I didn't mean to imply that there isn't some clandestine support or even some, kind of overt support in a short-term capacity. What I was referring to is Iran and Russia aren't going to get militarily involved if Iran's existence is jeopardized. For sure, the Russians do not want regime change in Iran. For sure, the Chinese do not want regime change in Iran. There's a question about the stance of some of the nations in the Arab Gulf and what their posture is on this. But they've all been, as the kids say, they've been cucked. Like they're all now just sort of, playing along with the Trump game. They've made their nice little deals with Jared Kushner and Donald Trump. They have nothing to say about Gaza. Iran, they're all going along. They say, oh, you can't use our airspace. Oh, you can't use our territory to attack Iran. Well, they're all allowing this huge influx of U.S. warplanes. They're all allowing the use of command and control centers, of satellites, of surveillance. They're all in partnership on this. But I'm just saying that at the end of the day, the Iranians have no nation state that is going to step up and do anything for them. Right. The Iranians have said that in the past, they were really disappointed in the so-called proxies under their control. You have Iraqi militias today saying, oh, if there's war, we're going to get involved with it. Ansar Allah, which technically has a ceasefire right now with the United States, almost certainly would get involved to some degree. But this is.
Yeah, we actually had some video on that a second ago that Gary was showing.
Yeah, and I mean, in a way, though, it's sort of like a fan blowing at a tornado with the amount of firepower that the United States has there. And look, at the end of the day, if the U.S. wants to do this, it's going to do it. But at what cost? At what cost to us as a nation, also to the United States?
And I want to go down that path here because we've been talking about the potential military cost. We've talked about some political costs, pro and con for Trump or the Democrats, but there's also a morality cost. And I think nobody exemplifies that better than Lindsey Graham.
Do we
think 1 minute about starving the Germans? Did we bomb every city into smithereens? So this is a war. No,
October 7th to World War II.
Yes, I am. This is an absolute existential threat to the Jewish people. What happened on October the 7th was 1,200 people were slaughtered, raped, and murdered and filmed by radical Islamists who would kill every Jew if they could, to the world. If you don't understand this is a threat to Israel's
And then
survival,
they flattened Gaza.
just flatten it. We flattened Berlin. We flattened Tokyo. Were we wrong to drop an atomic bomb to end the Japanese reign of terror? Were we? So my view, if I were Israel, I would have probably done it the same way.
So that, I mean, whatever you want to say, I mean, that the lack of human compassion and the eagerness, if not the lust about, yes, let's kill a bunch of people and flatten it, and that's fine. Rule of law, forget about it. Constitution, forget about it. Separation of powers, forget about that. Let's just kill as many people as we can. Do you think that this degradation in even the pretend morals of the country, and by those who follow him, and a lot of people are cheering this on, is a real problem for us beyond what we've already talked about?
Oh, I mean, we have some of the most dangerous lunatics speaking for the United States officially in the world in our history right now. And as I said, when you have the kind of military might that is possessed by the United States, by force, you can do almost anything on a tactical level. You can blow up almost anything. You can be a hammer constantly looking for a nail. The US has the capacity to do that multiple times over around the world. But at what cost down the line? You know, history is filled with examples of the United States or other empires thinking that they've won some victory. And it appears like that for a while. And then later, blowback occurs. Or later, you recognize that by doing these actions that you thought were so smart, you've created a bigger problem for yourself. With the way that the United States has facilitated the genocide against the Palestinians of Gaza, with the braggadocious way in which the president and his aides are talking about the role of the United States in the world, we are going down a path, and the end result of it, we may not realize for a generation or two, but I guarantee you that in doing these things around the world, the United States is making more enemies for itself than it's killing. You know, in boxing, sometimes you watch a fight and a fighter lands a blow to the kidney of the other fighter. And that fighter can keep fighting for quite a while, and they may even seem like they're doing well. But that kidney blow eventually causes them to collapse. And I think that part of what's happening here is that we've stepped into our own kidney punch. And the United States has taken blows through its own actions that we haven't seen the implications of yet, that we haven't seen the end result of yet. So if we want to run around the world and think that we're going to be able to support genocide, wipe people out, give the perception that we're at war against a religion, and this extends back to the post 9/11 period too. If we think we can run around the world and do all of this, and then we're going to say, oh, look at the great victories we've won. Let's name buildings and airports after Donald Trump. History is filled with examples of why this is sort of the folly of empire. And so I would say that, yes, on a tactical level, they can do almost anything they want in Iran. Maybe a lot of Americans are going to get killed as a result of it in the short term. But in the long term, we've damaged the fabric of our identity so irreparably in the world that it's unconscionable.
Well, I would love to argue with you, but I'm actually, before we let you go, I want to get your comment on one other thing, which unfortunately falls in this same category. And I'm going to circle back again to Ambassador Huckabee, who in that same interview was talking about the issue in Gaza. And part of this whole discussion right now with the Board of Peace and Jared Kushner and trying to make the Gaza Strip into some kind of Mediterranean, playhouse for the rich and famous, et cetera. Part of the issue that's being discussed is, well, what about the rebuilding of it? Should Israel pay for this or not? And here's what he had to say.
You know, there have been so many conflicts, Ambassador, throughout the years. You're well aware of them. We all are, where at the end of it, the people, the terrorists who had initiated the violence on Israel, then began whining and crying, saying Israel has to pay for the reconstruction of it. Israel would then donate money, cement to rebuild, and the terrorists take the cement and build the tunnels for the terrorists once again. So how can you ensure, and have you spoken to the president about making sure this isn't throwing good money after bad, knowing what's happened in the past?
One thing I'm pretty confident about is the president does understand construction. He understands what the budget should be and how much it should actually cost. The great tragedy of Gaza is that it could have been Singapore, but Hamas turned it into Haiti.
Should Israel be expected to even pay one penny to rebuild Gaza at this point?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I'll tell you, if anything, there ought to be reparations to Israel for the extraordinary fight that they have had to conduct to get their hostages back, 252, including many Americans, and to pay reparations to the families for the 1,200 people who were murdered, massacred, and mutilated by these hideous, disgusting savages of Hamas.
So it was Hamas that turned Gaza into Haiti, not the IDF. And it was those darn terrorists that are responsible for all of this. And apparently there's no antecedent to any of the violence. What do you say?
Well, I just on one thing on Huckabee, like I wonder how embarrassed Israeli officials are when they watch him at like what a sycophant he is. Like at some level, I wonder if they think, oh man, this isn't good for us, that the US ambassador basically is more radical than like Netanyahu in what he's saying. I mean, it's really, I feel secondhand embarrassment when I watch Mike Huckabee speak. You know, Germans have a word, Fremdschämen, you know, which is secondhand embarrassment that I find myself now often thinking of when I watch these kinds of things. But look, at the end of the day, and I spend a lot of time interviewing leaders of Hamas and Islamic Jihad, something that most American journalists don't do. And the characterization of Hamas as akin to ISIS or al-Qaeda is an epic lie. And from that lie stems an ability to dehumanize the Palestinian people and the idea of Palestinian resistance that is so lethal. What is happening right now, Daniel, with this spuriously named Board of Peace, is that they are telling Palestinians, the majority of whom are under the age of 18, that you are going to be plantation workers now on Jared Kushner's new real estate farm. And you're going to go through re-education camps. And you're going to have to bow down to a Zionist supremacist agenda, because that's what this is. And you are going to live under a technocratic committee of Palestinians who are essentially going to be the mayors of the prison that we're going to keep you in. But the West is in charge and the Israelis are in charge. And you're really just farming this land until we get rid of you and Israeli settlers come in. The one thing that's been clear since 1948-49, when the Nakba happened, when the first expulsion of 750,000 Palestinians occurred to impose the state of Israel on that region, is that the Palestinians have never given up. Whether Hamas goes away tomorrow or Islamic Jihad goes away tomorrow, the one thing that history shows is that Palestinians are going to continue to resist as long as they're alive. And that's why Israel wants them destroyed, because they're not giving up. We would have such common ground with Palestinians. Do you know that Gaza, I don't know how many people understand this, it is the #1 most educated population of refugees in the history of the world. Concentrated inside of Gaza. People who have lived inside of a trapped, small enclosed areas have higher degrees. Among the leadership of Hamas, there's engineers, one of the heads of Islamic Jihad is a pediatric surgeon who used to work with a Christian aid organization in Gaza. You have veterinarians, doctors, scholars, etc. You can disagree, you can debate. There are certainly Palestinians who hate Hamas, but we as Americans should really be asking ourselves, can we make deals with all these different countries and groups around the world? Do we just want to assume that our government's portrayal of them is correct? That's not really the American spirit. That's not really what journalism is. We should be fact-checking. We should be exploring, if war is really the last option, and we as a society believe that, why are we constantly looking for all these nails to hammer around the world? Why don't we actually have a dialogue and say, what common ground exists here? Look how many Palestinian Americans there are in the United States that own small businesses, including Christian Palestinians who live in Dearborn, Michigan or elsewhere. You know, you have Republicans, you have Democrats, you have small business owners, you have doctors, you have surgeons. The same is true inside of Gaza. It's a pluralistic society. Not everybody is pro-Hamas. Not everybody wants Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority to be the leader. In fact, most don't want him to be the leader. What I'm saying is people are people, And we're being led down these toxic, lethal roads by charlatans who are engaged in their own pursuit of self-greatness declaration like Trump, or Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz that want everybody else's kids to go and fight these pointless wars that are going to make us less safe as Americans anyway at the end of the day.
And you know what, I agree with literally every word you just said. And what concerns me is that in the like what happened with Venezuela, we have what one of my colleagues at Defense Priority called catastrophic success, because everything went according to plan. That best case scenario came out, and it makes people think that the next one is also going to be just as successful. And we can keep doing this everywhere at low cost, easy, especially media benefits. And this one, sure, it'll cause some casualties. I should have put this one up there. That Lindsey Graham said also, where a couple of days ago, he said, "God bless you, military. I know some of you are going to get attacked if we launch this, but." And I was like, what do you mean? God bless. You know Americans are going to die because you're going to choose a war here, and we're supposed to be blessed by that. But if they succeed, this will continue on. I wonder if it's going to take, and what do you think in the last few minutes we have here, what do you think it's going to take to get us away from this dangerous, dangerous direction that you just described?
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it a term thrown around in the Air Force about the self-licking ice cream cone?
Oh yeah, Army had that one too.
Yeah, but I mean, look, I mean, you and I both have studied the history of American warfare, of U.S. foreign policy. I think what we're looking at here is under Trump, we have a merging of some of the most dangerous strands of American political thinking. It has some elements of what the Democrats coined sort of like this idea of military humanism, where you have like cruise missile launches and you claim that it's happening under the veneer of supporting democracy or human rights, and that's how you defend your militarism or women's rights or whatever. Then you have the neocons. Well, we're going to redraw the maps and we can create all of these para societies that we dominate but are sort of in our image. And then you have the Alan Dulles, the CIA at the beginning. We're going to just overthrow all these regimes in the world. All these things are mixed together in this current White House in a horrifying way. But at the end of the day, one of the things that actually does give me some degree of hope is whether it's on the left or on the right, there's an independent thinking that is really spreading in the United States and around the world. And you see alliances being made on issues that would have been unthinkable years ago. The idea that you and I can sit here and dialogue. The spreading of independent media. The idea that people that didn't think of themselves as being involved with media say, you know what? I have a background like yourself, Daniel. I spent decades in the military. I have insight that I can offer here. And hey, I have a really critical view of what's happening here. I'm going to create a roundtable where I can bring on people, some I agree with, some I disagree with. Maybe we wouldn't agree if we were talking about every possible issue under the sun. That's a threat to the kind of way it used to be run. The media monopoly of corporate controlled, mainstream media, the deference to the politics of American empire that was embedded in so much journalism. There are things to hope for right now, even in the midst of all this darkness. So, it's a different show, but like we got to smash the two-party system in the United States. It doesn't do us a service that it's Cheech or Chong every single time. And, so that's a long slog though, it's a long slog, but I think there is reason to be hopeful because of programs like yours and the kinds of dialogue that you facilitate.
And the drop site news site that you running now too. So certainly that's another cog in that wheel, and we're certainly supportive of that. We're really, really grateful for you coming on today, and hope to have you back very soon.
All right, take care, Daniel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate you guys too as well. We're going to have another show this afternoon. We're going to talk about some of the, at least one of the similar things today, but on a kind of a bigger scale. And that is, I want to make crystal clear that this war is something, if it happens, is something that is absolutely chosen. It is not necessary. And that there is this whole, what I call merchants of death, that are pushing this war and trying to convince everybody in America that this is something that's necessary, and it's not. And I'm going to put their names out there and show. So we're going to come back to that. I haven't looked at the schedule. I think it's about 2:30 p.m. But watch your channel there. It's going to be at this afternoon on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Tune in then. See you then. You know, I don't try to talk you into buying gold or tell you how to run your stock portfolio, but there is a way you can help us. Subscribe, hit that like button, and share this with somebody you love.